living in a time when cyber threats are no longer isolated incidents, they are systematic risk. Enterprises are moving faster, embracing cloud native operations, remote work, real time digital engagement, but the cyber threats are evolving just as quickly, if not faster. Now, what we are witnessing now is a shift from opportunistic attacks to highly targeted, multi layered threat campaigns, and that raises the stakes for everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Analytics Insight podcast, where we explore the cutting edge of technology and its impact. And I'm your host, Priya Dayalani. Now, in today's rapidly changing cybersecurity landscape, embarking on a business resilience journey is essential. The evolving nature of cyber threats demands proactive measures to assess vulnerabilities, implement robust security measures, and adapt swiftly. Now, neglecting the intricacies between IT and operational technology, resilience and essential security measures can lead to financial losses, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. So, let's welcome Luke McNamara, Deputy Chief Analyst, Google Cloud, in today's episode, and he will help us understand how the evolving threat landscape is reshaping enterprise security strategies, not just here in India, but across the globe. Hi, Luke, how are you doing?
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you with us on a podcast today, Luke. And of course, we are going to touch down on a very sensitive and a crucial topic in today's digital era. Of course, we're going to dive deeper, but let's just set the foundation straight right in. Of course, we all know about Google Cloud, but if you could help us understand more about the organization that the general public probably don't know, and what kind of sets Google Cloud apart.
Yes. Well, so of course, Google Cloud is part of the larger Google organization. We are cloud service providers, so we provide a variety of different cloud solutions and services to enterprises across the globe. Really, I think there's a lot of things to say about it, but one I would really maybe hone in on is it's a great way for us to take the innovation that happens across Google and help deliver that to businesses, to governments. So when you think about the mission of Google to make the world's information universal and accessible and usable, really we're doing that focused on the enterprise. And a piece of that, of course, has to include security.
Great. Thank you for sharing that overview, Luke. And definitely it's fascinating to hear how Google Cloud is carving out a distinct place in such a competitive landscape. And I think our listeners will really appreciate understanding not just the breadth of Google Cloud's offering, but also, the philosophy driving its innovation and customer first approach. Having said that, we would also like to know more about Luke. How has your journey been till date? What triggered your interest at Google Cloud, and what exactly is your role at the company?
Sure. So I have worked in cyber threat intelligence for over the last 12 years. So I've spent my entire career working in cybersecurity within that specific discipline. I was with an organization called Mandiant until we were acquired by Google Cloud several years ago. And my role as Deputy Chief Analyst within our Google Threat Intelligence Group is to kind of help advance our mission in helping secure users, helping to secure, obviously, our organization, but helping to secure our enterprise customers. You mentioned risk at the beginning. I think that's very important. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing in my role is helping to communicate the insights that we see from the front lines of investigations that our Mandiant consultants, incident responders are doing, that our analysts are seeing across the globe, and take those insights into what's happening, what are the latest trends, and communicating that out in a way that hopefully captures here's how the cyber risk is changing, and taking that out to the decision makers in the customers that we serve.
That's fascinating, Luke, and it's really clear how you're playing a pivotal role in shaping the company's direction and impact, and of course, advancing the overall mission and securing your enterprise customers. I think that's really important, and thank you for giving us that inside look about your journey as well. Now, moving ahead, I think over the past decade, the evolving cyber attack landscape has seen an expansion of common attacks originating from IT networks. Now, at the intersection of OT and IT, now these attacks have an escalating impact that goes beyond just temporary downtime or triggering a cascade of significant financial and further consequences. Now, what we're really talking about here is a rapid weaponization of AI, increasingly complex supply chains, the rise of state-sponsored cyber activities, and of course, the growing sophistication of ransomware and multi-extortion strategies. So, what are some emerging trends you feel are shaping the future of cyber threats and enterprise risk in India and as well as globally?
Sure. So maybe I'll separate that into two components. That would be the cyber threat actors. So how is that changing? As we know, when we talk about cyber threats, ultimately we're talking about a human on the other side of the keyboard. So I think it's useful to understand, what are the humans who are contributing to this problem of cyber threats? How are they shaping the landscape? When they're made up of nation states or criminal groups. What are the cyber actors doing? And then the other piece would be the technology itself. What's being targeted? What's being impacted? What's being affected? So on the first part, I think one of the things that we see across the world today is with increased global tensions, sometimes those are very regional, sometimes those play out more globally. That is continuing to contribute to some of the cyber threat activity we see, particularly from nation state actors and state sponsored espionage, but also with global hacktivism. That's something we've really started to see as it's evolved over the years, but maybe more so in earnest in the last 5 years. Global hacktivists that these can be, independent, maybe patriotically motivated or ideologically motivated individuals that band together and they carry out activities such as DDoS attacks or defacements of websites. That has been something that has certainly shaped the landscape. These are individuals and groups that are galvanized around when there are regional tensions. And of course, in a world with increased uncertainty, the importance for cyber espionage to inform nation states' understanding of what's happening in the world, that's something that is more impactful than ever before. So that component, I think, is really shaping a lot of what we see on the activity side. The other big component, of course, that you have to touch on if talking about cyber threats is not just what's being motivated by these global tensions, but also the financial component to this. And this is where cybercrime plays in. What we continue to see today across the range of cyber threat activity and financially motivated activity that we track, there continues to be a mix, but overwhelmingly, this is still being driven and shaped by what we see with ransomware and extortion. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit more in depth. So that's kind of the first piece of the actors themselves. The other piece, though, as I mentioned, is the actual technology component or what's being targeted. We just released our MTrends report. This is the 16th year we've been doing this. And while we gather data from a variety of different sources within Google Threat Intelligence Group, this particular report, I think, is very important because it's drawn from our frontline incident response engagements over the past year. So what we saw for 2024 was interesting. For initial infection vectors, right? How organizations were predominantly compromised, how threat actors initially broke in. Exploits in public-facing technology continues to lead the way. Sometimes these are known vulnerabilities, sometimes these are 0 days. But this is still something that has shaped a lot of what we've seen, including within the region. The other big component, though, that I would mention that's contributing to a lot of impactful breaches is the role of identity. As identity becomes more important for us in our daily lives, in our businesses, things like credentials that we use to verify that identity are more and more being targeted. And there's a variety of ways threat actors are going about this. But those are two of the, I would say, kind of primary things that we've seen, both globally and impacting organizations in India.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Those thought-provoking insights, Luke. And definitely, it's really fascinating, as well as a bit sobering to hear how the dynamics of the threat landscape has evolved over the years and how emerging technologies influencing both the opportunities as well as risks for organizations today. And of course, I think whether it's exploitation of AI for more sophisticated attacks or the growing menace of deep fakes, I think it's really important how enterprises enterprises, need to adapt their strategies accordingly. Having said that, let's unpack our conversation further. I think now let's zoom in on one of the most urgent and destructive forms of cybercrime that we are seeing today. I think that's ransomware and multi-extortion. Ransomware attacks, I think we all know about these attacks, but I think they have increased significantly in both quantity as well as impact, and it's establishing itself as a major cause of concern in the cybersecurity landscape. Now, disruptive attacks, such as, they have a significant impact on vital sectors, whether it's F&B, healthcare, transportation, energy. We have all come across such real world case scenarios as to how it has impacted these industries. In fact, reports show that multi extortion ransomware attacks in 2024 alone have surged by over 70% globally, and India ranks among the top 10 most targeted countries. So, how do you think ransomware and multi extortion are becoming a rising threat to businesses? And how do you think that we can overcome this situation?
Yeah, great question. So, as I mentioned, there's a variety of different things that we see from threat actors that are predominantly financially motivated. And I think what we've seen over the years, threat actors in this sort of financially motivated criminal space, they're very creative with how they seek to make money off of organizations that they compromise. So if they gain access to a network, there may be a variety of different ways they exploit that. Maybe there's PII information in that environment, in that network. Maybe they'll try to steal that and then sell that in the underground. Maybe they'll deploy crypto miners to use some of the compute power of that organization. But as you mentioned, again, the dominant threat that we've seen that's been impacting enterprises globally and in India in the financially motivated space continues to be ransomware and extortion. And it is interesting to see how even that has evolved. As you noted, for some time, ransomware has been a problem, but really, I would say end of 2019, early 2020, we started to see a lot of these threat actors realize there's another way that they could extort companies once they carry out these operations, once they gain initial access. And that's not just through deploying encryptors to lock down systems and data. Again, that's still very common. But as organizations have gotten better at having backups, at being able to restore from backups, these criminals realized they needed another way to extort companies. And I think part of what has shaped this has been this realization that if we're already in an organization's environment, if there's data there that may be sensitive, that maybe the company doesn't want released, we can steal that data and we can threaten to leak it. We can post it to these data leak sites or DLS. And that can be another means by which we extort the company. So this has been something that we've continued to see. 2024, we saw the largest number of posting of unique victims to data leak sites across the data leak sites that we track. Now, there's sometimes problems with those data sources. Sometimes threat actors repost old data, or they make up, having successfully compromised organizations they haven't. But I think still directionally that those numbers are still useful to get a sense of how big this extortion problem is. And unfortunately, I think it's pointing to this continuing to grow. What we're really seeing in this space, though, is a lot of churn. So when you think about the ransomware and extortion, multifaceted extortion ecosystem, it's a lot of different types of actors. So you have threat actors that specialize in initial access. They will look for organizations that may have technology that has a publicly known vulnerability. They exploit that organization. They install a backdoor, or they capture credentials, and then they sell that access to another group. And that other group may be working with an even third party who actually develops and licenses the ransomware themselves to actually go and deploy that. So it's an ecosystem that has a lot of different actors. Those actors' relationships continuously change. Over the years, we have seen law enforcement efforts to disrupt and take down some of the infrastructure, arrest criminals. And I think that's been helpful, but I think we still see that these groups can easily reform. We see a lot of ransomware today where there's significant code usage or overlap with previous ransomware families. So I think that points to the fact that this is still a problem. This is something that I think requires a lot of global efforts to combat. There's particular types of threat actors that specialize in certain parts of these operations that we have to do more to disrupt. But I think intelligence sharing can be a useful tool here. And I think that's really why it's so important. And again, part of our organization's mission is to share the insights of what we're seeing across the landscape and hopefully make those useful and applicable to localized organizations wherever our customers in the world might be.
Absolutely. I think it's pretty alarming, I would say, that how ransomware has evolved, because earlier it was just known as a simple data encryption, and now it has evolved into a complex multi-extortion campaign. And of course, I completely agree with you that it is an entire ecosystem, and these groups can be formed very easily. And of course, we definitely require a lot of global efforts to combat these attacks. And what we need is a constraint level of preparedness and resources in place to respond effectively and mitigate these attacks as and when we flag them. Now we have been talking about AI and cyber attacks. I think one of the reasons, data is exploding, and the rapid proliferation of cloud computing has fundamentally transformed how companies store, manage, and secure their data. However, as these companies are increasingly relying on cloud-based systems, they face various security challenges. Now, the attributes that make cloud computing attractive, like scalability or accessibility, also makes it a prime target for cyber criminals. Of course, traditional security measures, which were designed for on-premise environments, they often fail to address these unique security demands that are coming up with the evolving nature of cloud technology. So, how do you think AI here and deep threat research are playing an important role in driving the next phase of securing cloud innovation?
Yeah, great question. I think it's interesting. Obviously, there's discussions around the usage of AI across the world today in a variety of different contexts, even within the enterprise, within businesses, dependent on the hat different business leaders might wear. They may think about AI differently. And I think it's interesting because if you're a CISO or security leader within an organization, there's really at least three ways you have to think about AI. So you have to think about how to securely and safely use AI as your organization increasingly adopts it. How do you secure those AI tools? How do you secure the AI that's going into the environment, the data that's going into AI models? You have to think about how the adversaries are using AI, right? And this is something maybe we can touch on later too. But as organizations themselves are adopting AI, criminals, nation states, other threat actors are also looking to trial and experiment and potentially use this in some of their own activity. And then lastly, there is how can we use AI as security defenders and practitioners? How can we use AI to close some of this threat gap? One of the things that we sort of think about at Google in the usage of AI for defenders is the three T's. So threat, toil, and talent. How do we find threats faster? How do we reduce or eliminate toilsome tasks? So I think anyone who's ever worked in cybersecurity has probably had the experience of doing, a lot of what can be monotonous or what should be, automated tasks. How can we use AI to better and more efficiently do those sorts of tasks? And then scale up talent. Everywhere you go in the world, every sector, I think, struggles with not having enough cybersecurity personnel to fill all of the various billets and job openings that exist. And so a piece of this is how can we train up more people to do some of these tests? How can we help maybe junior analysts in security operations centers progress their experience in their career faster by being able to focus on more higher level problems? And how can we sort of train them up along the way by using AI? Those, I think, are kind of some of the key pieces of how, essentially we can do more to be efficient and faster. And I think speed here is very key. When we're just talking about the ransomware and extortion threat. We've seen in the past where those sorts of operations can take place in a matter of 48 hours between when a threat actor gains access to a victim environment and they deploy encryptors and lock down data. So that's a very, very short window of time to detect and respond to that activity. Anything we can do to leverage AI to make the speed at which we respond to these threats faster, I think is incredibly important. So those are, I would say, some of the core ways that we can think about, employing AI to increase our capability as security defenders and better secure the assets that we're in charge of protecting.
Definitely, and it's really interesting to hear how AI and deep threat research. I mean, they're not just reacting to threats, but taking a step towards shaping a more secure and a resilient cloud environment. And of course, it is also critical as to how organizations can make that shift beyond traditional perimeter, defenses, and invest in more intelligent and adaptive security strategies. I would say. Now, when we talk about intelligence driven defense, I think it's impossible to ignore the role of Mandiant, which is now acquired by Google Cloud. I think for years now, Mandiant has been a global authority in uncovering advanced threats, many of which are state sponsored. So, your expertise in threat attribution, incident response, and adversary profiling has become very crucial for industries ranging from banking to telecom, healthcare, manufacturing. So, what is the role of Indian intelligence, which is of course now acquired by Google, in countering these advanced adversaries and ensuring more incident response across industries?
Yeah, so I think a piece of this is really, as you mentioned, we have a big focus on attribution, which is really trying to understand the nature of the threat actors that are carrying out these operations. And why that's important is we see variations in the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that various threat groups use. So some may target organizations by trying to find vulnerabilities in their VPN or firewall. Others might have a higher focus on, let's say, carrying out social engineering of employees, right? Contacting employees on social media, maybe sending them SMS-based spear phishing links. Those different techniques and tactics can look different based on the type of industry that you're in, the part of the world that you're in. For example, in India, one of the things that we still see fairly prevalent is spear phishing. That's a common technique, maybe more so than other parts of the world. So if you're an organization and you want to maybe better understand where do I need to invest in my security defenses, threat intelligence is a very important way to do that. There's a variety of different data sources that we draw from to do this. I mentioned earlier the main incident response function. That's something that really is key because it gives us a window into the very front lines of operations. So when we're going out and we're responding to breaches across the globe, we get that frontline understanding to see how threat actors are actually breaching organizations today, what they are targeting once they gain access to the organization in terms of data, or what types of disruption they may be trying to cause. So all of that sort of those insights feed back into our group, and we use those to make hopefully more informed and better sort of crafted analytic products for our customers, and to feed into detections at a very tactical level so organizations can be more secure. I think one of the big challenges, and this is where I think threat intelligence is very important, one of the big challenges that a lot of organizations face, and this is true across the C-suite, but also especially true, I think within the CISO's role is, you hear about all of these threats out in the landscape, and I think it can sound very scary and overwhelming. But I think really when threat intelligence is working the best is when we can help scope down that problem for business leaders and say, here are the threats that you need to be most focused on. These are the ones that are likely to have the bigger impact to your organization. And in a world where everyone has limited resources, I think that is something that, again, threat intelligence can play a useful role. It's never perfect, but anything we can do to say the probability that these threats are maybe the more likely ones that you see, or these are the risks that if they were to successfully, breach your network would have the biggest impact. That's really, I think, where threat intelligence shines.
Definitely, I completely agree with you, and I think having a technology partner which helps in identifying and staying ahead of sophisticated threats is so important. And of course, it's clear that timely intelligence doesn't just help detect adversaries. I think it empowers companies across sectors to strengthen their defenses proactively rather than reactively. I want to kind of address the elephant in the room, I would say. I mean, we now have generative AI, and generative AI is also now being used to craft ultra personalized phishing emails. Deepfake technology, for example, is enabling impersonation of executives during wire fraud attacks. And automated tools are scanning for vulnerabilities faster than human defenders, and they can patch them up. So, in a sense, I think attackers are also leveraging the very same innovation we rely on for digital progress and turning it against us. I think in recent years, AI has emerged both as a transformative force for innovation and a potent tool for cyber criminals as well. So, how do you think cyber criminals are leveraging AI tools against organization, and what do you think we can do to tackle this challenge?
Yes, this has been one of the most common and important questions that I get probably over the last several years in conversations with customers. Everyone wants to know, what are threat actors doing today, and how might they evolve, beyond what we're seeing today in terms of leveraging AI. And I would say there's a larger trend that I'd put this in as a component of. And that larger trend is, I think that there are more services out there. We talk about, for example, ransomware as a service, or RAS providers, or web skimming as a service. There's more of these sorts of services that are out there than ever before that provide less sophisticated, less skilled threat actors options to do more in terms of increasing their capability. And I think AI is one piece potentially in that, right? It potentially provides less sophisticated threat actors the ability to leverage tools to do more. And I think what that looks like, we did a study earlier this year looking specifically at our AI model, Gemini, and how threat actors were trying to leverage that. And I think it was interesting, some of the findings from that report, because what we observed in this study is that you could almost say, similar to how cyber defenders are trying to leverage AI to become more efficient, to become faster. A lot of the use cases that we saw from threat actors were very similar in terms of they were trying to leverage efficiencies. So, for example, you have a threat actor that is trying to code a particular function in malware, or maybe a certain component of a query in command prompt. They may ask, an AI model to kind of help in doing that. And that might not be something that's in and of itself malicious, but it may be something that, allows them to do a particular function more efficiently. Or let's say reconnaissance of a target. There was one threat actor, APT42, that we've tracked for some time, a state-sponsored threat actor, and they typically do a lot of social engineering. They focus on sort of, high value targets, individuals, and they typically will do, either through spear phishing or credential collection, more personalized, targeted of that individual. And a piece of something that likely informs their operation is reconnaissance of that target. Where do they live? Maybe where do they go to school? Things of that nature. And so we saw some of the activity that actor was using Gemini for was around that same sort of reconnaissance, right? To do reconnaissance more efficiently. So I think there's things like that where threat actors may try to leverage AI to do the things they're already doing, but just do them faster. A lot of the examples in this report we found to be all across the attack lifecycle, again, from the reconnaissance phase through. But I think we're still in the early days of this. There's areas like you mentioned, deep fakes. Voice cloning is something else that I think is potentially concerning. Our own red team, actually, and red teams, for those who aren't familiar, groups that essentially play the role of the bad guy to test organizations' defenses. And they've been able to use voice cloning technology to emulate, say, an executive's voice, and then use that to contact the help desk, get an account reset, and then use that to gain access to the rest of the environment. So I think things like that, we've certainly seen the provability or applicability of this technology to certain types of intrusions and threat activity. And I think as a result, this is where, again, things like red teaming are very important, is it enables us to test defenses. And if we find ways they can be successfully broken, then we have to figure out, okay, what is the workaround to this? How do we harden this particular point of attack by the adversary? If a red team is able to do this successfully, how could we make this harder for an actual bad guy? So I think we have to be thinking creatively. We know the bad guys are going to be thinking creatively. We have to think about what they might do. And then as we start to see certain techniques become more prevalent, again, this is where threat intelligence can say the likelihood of this attack might start going up. You should be thinking about how to better secure this particular, initial infection vector point. But those insights, again, from the front lines are going to be very important for us as we enter this age of AI to see how do threat actors actually adopt AI, not just what do we expect for them to do.
Definitely. And I think I agree with you that it's really important as to how creative we can be in today's age to handle this situation where cyber criminals are also harnessing AI to scale their attacks and evade traditional defenses. I think we also need more precision and speed compared to, how these malicious actors are also using it for their advantage. I think what we really need to see is how we can harness AI to turn the tide in their favor. I think threat intelligence has become invaluable is what I can, have conclude from the conversation that we have been having. And it's really important that we give more importance to real time and contextual threat intelligence. So having said that, how would you define the importance of threat intelligence in enabling faster detection and response?
Yeah, I think it's an important and crucial input into the rest of the security landscape. So obviously, automated tools that can detect phishing coming in, or tools to better speed the patching process. These are all important. These sorts of technologies are key. But threat intelligence, I think, can be a really useful input into all of that. Intelligence in and of by itself can't do too much, right? It has to be operationalized in the environment. To be honest, that is one of the challenges that we see with a lot of organizations today. Is they may have a threat intelligence provider, a threat intel feed, but actually getting that threat intelligence to be implemented and properly working with the variety of different security tools and the security processes, informing stakeholders, all of that requires some work. So I think that's a key piece for organizations to ensure they're sort of maximizing the value that they can. And I would also note, intelligence isn't something that is just something that comes from an external provider, like us. This is something that you can collect in your own environment. If you have data in your environment, your information you have, maybe historically on spear phishing campaigns that your organization has seen, that is powerful data that can help inform your own intelligence picture. And ultimately, what we're talking about is really, again, going back to risk. The sort of kind of key bridging point, I think, between threat intelligence and understanding cyber risk in your environment is building a threat model. Understand what are the sort of organization crown jewels and key assets. What are threat actors targeting you for? It may be your data, it may be your customers. What are the sorts of technologies that you have in your environment that the threat actors might try to exploit? What do you need to focus on securing and hardening? Some organizations may have very, very large attack surface. And so that's one of the challenges that they face, is having to secure many different points of entry. But ultimately, I think, again, threat intel can help inform that threat model. And over time, the collection of data that feeds into the intelligence picture can help refine that threat model. And ultimately, that is something that can better prepare the organization, the senior stakeholders in that organization, to understand what is the real cyber risk that we face, and then to put investments properly into the things that hopefully mitigate some of those risks. So again, that's, I think, where kind of the real value of threat intelligence properly applied to the organization, that's really where it resides.
Definitely. I think understanding and addressing potential risks across processes, activities, and assets is a vital first step in building resilience. And at the same time, fostering a culture and communication with stakeholders is important to align your expectations and enable an ongoing journey in shifting the risk landscape. Thank you so much, Luke, for taking out the time and effort to be on our podcast today and helping us understand that cybersecurity is no longer just an IT function, it's a core business strategy. Of course, it's also a customer trust deficient, and in many cases, it's the single most critical factor in preserving a company's reputation and continuity. So, thank you so much for your insights. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much. So, this is for our listeners. I think today's conversation was not just about understanding the threat landscape. It was more about empowering ourselves with intelligence, innovation, creativity, and because in the cyber battlefield, knowledge isn't power, it's protection. Until next time, I'm Priya Dayalani, and this is Analytics Insight Podcast, where the future of tech meets thoughtful conversation. Thanks for tuning in, and you can view all our previous podcasts on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.